Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Christina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Christina Schmidt. Today we have a very exciting guest that I'm very happy to have on the podcast with me. So our guest today is Andrew Oxley. Andrew is an executive coach, author, and speaker, and CEO and founder of the Oxley Group. I cannot speak today. Sorry, Andrew. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, Christina.
We're so happy to have you. So tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? That kind of thing.
Well, actually, I like to say I'm culturally confused because I was born in England, grew up in Canada, and I live in the U.S. now. I did have the good fortune and choice of marrying a Southern girl. So she is my cultural translator. It tells me when I've transgressed Southern culture, which is not as often as it was when I first moved here about 30 years ago.
There you go.
But yeah, so that's sort of a little bit. We have four wonderful kids and live just northeast of Atlanta.
Awesome. How old are your kids now?
I have to be careful, but they're all out of college. One is married, 27 and married.
Okay.
Got a 25-year-old, a 23-year-old, and a 21-year-old.
Okay, so relatively close in age, but all somewhat out of the house. Maybe not all out of the house.
Well, not all out, but two are out, and one's finished college and saving for a house, and the fourth one is still in college, so he's back for the summer.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that sounds exciting, and I love your cultural backgrounds. I went the opposite, as most people know. So I grew up in the U.S., spent a little time in Germany, and then it wound up in Canada. Now headed back U.S. side soon. So we'll a little bit culturally confused myself sometimes. But it's great experience. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your business. Tell us about the Oxley Group and what you do.
Yeah. And, so I actually started out as an engineer, which uniquely qualifies me for what I do today, which is a nice way of saying it's no qualification whatsoever. I started selling commercial air conditioning in Toronto, Canada for a company called Train Air Conditioning. And Toronto was going through a big building boom at the time, and that enabled me to have some economic freedom early on. I like to say I had my midlife crisis early in life, hoping it was not the actual midpoint of my life, but because if it was, we're approaching the end. But I decided that I wanted to do something different with my life. I had a lot of challenges, and some of your listeners can probably appreciate this. I had way more to do than I had hours in the day to do it. I was working 80 to 100 hours a week, economically successful, but I had a great lifestyle, but no life. Mm-hmm. My friends used to see me for very intense periods on the weekend, and then I'd disappear for long periods. And I was like, man, there's got to be more to life than this. And so I decided that the problem was my job. And actually, the problem was not my job. The problem was me and how I was doing my job. But I didn't know that at the time. And I'm sort of glad I didn't, because it led me to where I am today. But the problem with thinking that your job is the issue is that when you get a new job, you take the biggest problem with you, which is yourself.
Yep.
Right? You go and recreate the same stuff in the next place you go. And so one of the things that I had to come to grips with was that I had to do some things differently. Now, I started a business in the training world, which my friends in Toronto thought was absolutely hilarious, because I would have been elected the most likely to fall asleep during training in Toronto, because it was usually taught by somebody who was not very knowledgeable about what we did, who had examples that did not relate to what I did. And so it wasn't particularly helpful, or maybe it was just me. I'm not sure. But I do know that when we started this company, we decided we were going to do some things differently, that we're not going to be big on theory. We're going to be big on practical application, and started to focus on the thing that most operational leaders want to talk about, which is business results. I think when you make training about changing skill level, mm-hmm. It's good, but the problem with that is that it becomes an HR initiative quite often, and people don't pay attention. So they're like, they do it when they have time. And mm-hmm. So we were very clear from the outset that we would not take on any training engagements where we did not have clarity about what the business result that was supposed to change if the behavior and the skill level changed. And then we would measure whether the business results changed, which made it now an operational initiative, not a HR initiative. Nothing wrong with HR. It's just that you can't put HR in charge of a change process and think it's going to be successful, because people will only pay attention to what their boss is telling them to pay attention to. And their boss is probably not in HR. So
yes,
we connected business results to skill change, and we were able to get some really fabulous clients early on. Progressive Insurance was one, Mohawk Industries, Cartier, Coca-Cola, and that led us to working with all sorts of other types of companies. And what they all have in common is that the biggest challenge most businesses have is people. In fact, I always tell leaders, you only have 3 problems. And they're like, what are they? I'm like, I don't know, but they only have 3. And they're like, well, they think I'm being glib. But I'm like, no, you have 3 problems. It's either people, process, or product. Yeah. And so what you need to figure out is which bucket does this problem fall into? If it's a people problem, okay, so then we got to figure out how to solve people problems. And most of the complex problems that leaders deal with are people problems. They're not process and product. Fortunately for us, process and product can be quite simple, because people are incredibly complex. And the more people you put in an organization, it doesn't go up linearly, it goes up exponentially, the complexity.
Yep. I agree with everything you're saying, because I've similar background. I'm also an engineer, which I'm uniquely qualified for what I do as well. Yeah. Yes, but I think like what I do lean to, and what is clear to me, is when you talk about the process part of it. Like the process, most people will lay out a process, but it's the people end of it that makes it not successful, because they're not executing it, they're not following up, they're not launching it out well, because they didn't do the people part right.
Yeah.
So at least that's what I'm finding. Do you find something similar?
Yeah. Well, and in fact, one of my favorite things to do, especially with new leaders, is I'll ask them, I'll say, do you ever ask your people to do things and they don't do them? And they're like, all the time. I'm like, and do you think to yourself, what is wrong with them? I would never act that way. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, you know what the problem is, don't you? And they're like, yeah, it's them. I'm like, no, it's you. You think you're normal. And normal's a statistical sampling of likelihood. And the fact that you're in charge in a leadership position, whether you own the company or a leader within a company, you are not normal. You are not put in place because you are normal. You were put in place because you were essentially abnormal. You were better than those people. So that doesn't mean the things they're doing are okay or desirable or what we should be looking for, but to make them the problem, making the people the problem, makes people defensive. Now, I'm not saying they don't need to change and do things differently, but we got to recognize, just because I understand what they should be doing differently and I don't understand why they're not doing it, doesn't mean they don't have a reason for why they're doing it, or that maybe they don't even understand how to do it. I mean, all problems look simple in the rearview mirror. When you've solved it, you're like, why did that take so long? But so we forget as leaders what it was like to be like the people now we are seeking to lead. So this is the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges I see for new leaders, especially.
Oh, I could definitely see that. Yes. So how do you help them with that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we say a lot to leaders is a leader is only required when a journey is involved. Now, the journey could involve taking an organization to somewhere it's not gone before, or a person or a group of people to somewhere they've not gone before. But there will always be a gap between where you are and where you want to be. There will be a gap for the people, the process, the product, the group, the organization. So being frustrated that there's a gap between where you are and where you want to be means you are dooming yourself to a life of perpetual frustration. So we got to recognize there's always going to be a gap. So the question is, how do I close the gap? And so to go on a journey, you have to know 3 things, right? You have to know where you are, you have to know where you're going, and you have to have a plan.
Yep.
And what I see leaders start with is the plan, with the presumption that everyone knows where they are and everybody knows where we're going and they want to go there. I'm like, rarely true. Yep. They may know where we're going, but they probably aren't that excited about it. I mean, I said to a leader recently, I said, so what's your goal for this year? He said, we're going to hit X number of $1 million in sales. And I'm like, awesome. And so what happens when you hit that? They're like, well, we'll have, a goal plus 15% next year. I'm like, do you have any idea how demotivating that is to your team?
Yes.
It's like, so that you're never done, right? So,
yes.
So first of all, you have to have a goal that they're excited about, and we can get into what that might look like. But first of all, they have to be passionate about it. Then they have to agree where they're starting from.
Mhm.
Now, the most measurable occupation on the planet is sales. So you would think salespeople would know where they were, right? And yet, I could agree that my sales are essentially in the tank. I just disagree why. So
Ah,
when my sales manager comes to me, my leader, my business leader comes to me and says, "Hey, here's what you need to do to fix your sales." I'm like, "That's not the problem. I'm not the problem. The problem is the market, the customer, the product, the customer service people. They're the problem." So we have to get clear on the endpoints of the journey. Essentially, once you get the endpoints of the journey identified, the plan is super easy. But we just skip right over the endpoints of the journey and jump to the plan.
so why do you think people do that? Because I
Because
see it too, but
yeah, well, I think it's so obvious to us, right? Like
yeah.
if you're managing someone and you're within your functional area, right? Which let's just if I'm not within my functional area, this would not necessarily be true. But if I'm within my functional expertise, like if I'm in the accounting group and I was
Mhm.
an accountant, if I'm in the sales group, I was a salesperson. If I'm in the operations group, I probably was promoted through the ranks. So
Yeah.
I understand their job better than they do. So I know what the problem is, and I presume that because I know what the problem is, it's clear to them that I know what the problem is and that they're in agreement. And I
Mhm.
find this is rarely true,
Mhm.
that they usually see the problem differently. Maybe let's just for argument's say they're wrong. They do not see the problem clearly. Like the employee does not see the problem clearly.
Mhm.
The boss does see the problem clearly. It's irrelevant because if they don't agree, they're not going to commit to the plan. And
Yeah.
so for your listeners, if you've ever coached somebody and got agreement, you thought, on what they were going to do differently, and you came back some days later and they were still doing the same dang thing they were doing before you had the conversation, we probably know what the problem is at this point. They did not agree that your solution was the solution that was going to affect change. And what they really did was they nodded until you left. And then they
Yep.
went about doing what they thought they needed to do to
Yes.
affect change on their own.
Absolutely. I literally had a coaching call this morning where my client basically came to that realization. He's like, "Oh, so he's just nodded and agreed with me when I was brainstorming all these ideas as to what it was." I was like, "Yes, yes, he
Yeah,
did."
that's exactly what happened.
Love it. It's funny because it doesn't matter the industry, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like your problems, like you said, people, process, product. Those are there, whether it's a service or even a nonprofit, you still have a product that you're doing and you still have a thing that you're doing. So it's one of those three things. So I like to simplify. Like that's a great way to simplify it. So awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we started talking a little bit about what it takes to scale, like before we got on the thing, like what it takes a business to scale, because there's a lot of, entrepreneurs, they get into this business, they start doing all the things, and now they've got all these people. Now they're kind of at this point, it's like, I need to grow, or I am growing, but gosh, now what? So how do you help people do that?
Oh, so we have a model we use called the 7 stages of CEO freedom. And so there's different stages you go through. You're in the startup phase where you're just excited and then you do the ramp up phase where you start to hire people, right? And typically in the ramp up phase, you can still touch people. And you can still get around and you know what's going on in the business. When you start to get to the multiplication phase where you're multiplying in terms you're not just adding 1 or 2 people, maybe you're adding 5 or 6, you start to lose control of the business, and you start to and this is actually hardest if you are functionally good at the thing you started the business in, because you know what needs to be happening in a particular department. And so it's easy if I start like a plumbing business, it's easy for me to hire an accountant to do the accounting because I don't know anything about that and I don't want to do it anyway. But the plumbing, I mean, that's hard to let go of because I know how that's supposed to be done, right? And so, Michael Gerber talked about this in his book, The E-Myth, right? Years and years and years ago, that entrepreneurs start their business in an entrepreneurial seizure, thinking that because they're good at what they do, they can run a business, and running a business is grossly different, right? So when you get into the multiplication phase, all of a sudden you can't touch everybody. And if your listeners want to play a little game at some point, just draw a circle and put 2 dots in it across from each other. That's the first person you hire, and it's simple because there's 1 line of communication. When you hire your 3rd person, you have 3 lines of communication, right? Which is okay, right? And so now the challenge we get into is when you hire the 4th person, because now you don't have 4 lines of communication. You draw this out on a circle, you have many more. When you hire your 5th, so it goes up exponentially in terms of complexity. So what leaders do is, what business owners quite often do is, this was so much more fun when I was fewer people working for me, because now all I do is deal with people. Yep. And to be perfectly honest, once you get above about 7 or 8 people, most of your problems are going to be people problems, because you should have someone handling the process and the product delivery. Now, you may say, well, I can't afford to do it. Well, the question really becomes, can you afford not to? So you go through these transitions between these phases, and a transition is very turbulent. But the challenge is, if you try to make yourself smaller, where it's not as turbulent, what ends up happening is you lose your best people, because they're like, you know what, you're not growing. There's not much opportunity. It's hard to attract A players into an organization that's not growing. There's this interesting balance we have to have, where we have to grow at not a rate that the organization can't handle, but at a proportional rate that is manageable in terms of the organization. And so what most people do is they try to grow too fast, and it's like trying to go run a marathon when you haven't ran yet, and you can't walk the next day, and you're like, oh, this doesn't work. Whereas what we could do is you say, no, I want to run a half marathon in 6 months. Well, I can train for that. Having proportional goals. We'll certainly look out, where do I want to be, in 10, 20 years, but where do I want to be in 3 years? And then where would I like to be in a year? And then what do I need to do this quarter? In addition to flying the plane, what do I need to do to make things better in 3 months? And the problem with a lot of entrepreneurs, Christina, is they're that's just too boring for them. Yeah. They'd much rather accomplish the 3-year goal in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And then they can't build the infrastructure to manage the growth, and it's just not fun for them anymore. And if you start a business and you want to eventually sell it, then make it a business that doesn't require your presence, because it'll be worth a lot more money when it doesn't require your presence. And you may decide you don't want to sell it because it's fun at that.
Yeah. So based on what you're saying, are you saying that some people maybe just aren't cut out to kind of grow the business and scale it, and they should just maybe be the serial entrepreneur that gets it up and running, moves on, gets it up and running, moves on? Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
That is true. There are some people who are much more excited with that early growth phase, and and they may even be able to get the business to a size where the multiple is high enough where they can exit and have it be worthwhile. I found most entrepreneurs, the number of really serial entrepreneurs out there probably aren't that great. Most people start a business because they know something about the business.
Yeah.
I see a lot of our clients that even when they sell their business, they get the non-compete, say, for 3 years, and then they start another business exactly the same after 3 years. But they don't start it. Like, I had one guy who sold their business for $100 million. And they started 4 years later, they started a replacement business essentially at $100 million. Like, they didn't start at zero.
Okay.
Because of what they knew. As soon as they opened their door, they had a flood of employees and clients that wanted to come work with them. And essentially they started that year at 100 million. So they finished a business because, once you learn something, no one can take that away from you.
Yes. Yep.
Now, let me share this with you, because that maybe this will be helpful for your audience. The reason we get stuck in our growth is not what we know. It's what we don't know. It's the questions we don't have answers to. And what we do is we ask what I call why questions, like, why don't I have more time? Why can't I find more dedicated, engaged employees? Why are young people like so flighty these days? All why questions are not helpful. You will get an answer. It will not be a helpful answer because of this, because of that. It's all external, right? But if I change the why question to a how question, how can I find more motivated employees? Now, the problem with the how question is, if I knew the answer, I'd already be doing it. So I don't know the answer to the how question. So I get busy with what I do know.
Yeah.
I get busy with all the stuff.
Yep.
But that's not going to move me forward. That's just going to keep me treading water. How do I find talented, engaged employees? I don't know. I wonder who would. Who would know that? If I said, I don't know how to do that. So what I'm going to do is, every entrepreneur I meet for the next 30 days, I'm going to ask, how do you find people? you live up in Canada now. I think they have a Chick-fil-A up there now.
Yes. Yeah. It's here now.
Chick-fil-A, it's so funny because Chick-fil-A, you can go into any Chick-fil-A anywhere, and when you order and you place your order and you say thank you, they say my pleasure. No matter where you are, they'll say my pleasure. Now, my son had a job there when he was a teenager, and he came home one day and after work, and I said thank you. He said my pleasure, and he's like, it was so ingrained into his head that he's like, I hate that I say that all the time now. And I said to him, I said, Drew, how did they get you to say that? And he's like, it's so funny. He said, because when I first got there, I didn't say it. And the manager beside me who was watching me would just remind me gently, hey, remember, you're supposed to say my pleasure. And they didn't get mad at me. They didn't yell at me. They didn't write me up. They just said, hey, remember, you're supposed to say my pleasure. And he said, after a little while, you get reminded enough about something. And he said, I started saying my pleasure. Mm-hmm. And then when I said my pleasure, they'd be like, that's awesome. And guess what he said when they said that's awesome?
My pleasure.
My pleasure. So now if Chick-fil-A can take 15-year-old kids and get them to say my pleasure, serving chicken to people who probably, maybe they're having a good day, maybe they're not. I think we could persist on it, trying to find the answers to questions that we don't know the answers to. So I would challenge all your podcast listeners. What is one question I don't have the answer to right now that I wish I did? And make it don't make it like I wish I could, charge more for my customers. That's, not an I wish question. How could I change my pricing structure and raise my prices with my customers? And you don't know the answer to it, but write the question down. So one of the things I did in Toronto when I left, I actually found a question. I had a question like, how do I live a life of purpose and significance and still do well financially? And I didn't know, right? But I actually cut the saying out of the Globe and Mail that had caused me to start this question. The Globe and Mail, I don't know if they still do, they had this thing called Your Morning Smile, and it's supposed to get your day off with a pep in your step. And this particular morning, the saying was, the trouble with the rat race is even if you win, you're still a rat.
I just read that today. Where did I read that?
And
I read that today. Yes.
Now, I didn't know what I was doing, actually, because I was just young. I was 27. But I actually cut it out of the paper and I put sellotape on both sides. I didn't have a laminating machine. And I put it in my wallet, And I kept, every time I opened my wallet, I'm like, how do I do that? How do I not end up a rat? And I didn't know. But literally, that is the question that led me to where I am today, because I didn't know the answer to it. So what's the question that your podcast listeners don't know the answer to? And then here's the beautiful thing. Rarely is there somebody that has not walked down the path you're walking. So like if somebody came to you, were a plant manager right before this iteration. So you learned a lot about being a plant manager, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sink or swim but yes, I did.
So if a new plant manager came to you and said, hey, listen, can you give me some advice on how to be successful as a plant manager? You'd be like, well, actually, the advice you gave them would probably not even be that complicated. It would be like, okay, here's some things you got to focus on. And they would go, it can't be that simple. But it is. Success is not complicated. We want it to be complicated because then we're absolved of all responsibility of doing the things that are necessary to be successful, right? But it's actually not. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It's not, right? But what do you need to do differently? Who can you go and talk to? Who can you ask questions of? I mean, you're a coach. I'm a coach. I have a coach right now. He actually lives in Portugal right now, but I have a coach right now. And people are like, you coach people. Why do you have a coach? I'm like, because you can't coach yourself.
Exactly. Everybody needs a coach.
Everybody needs a coach.
Yep.
So, having a coach is a great blind spot remover. Because we all have blind spots. I meant to say to you, if you don't know an answer that you don't have the answer to, a question you don't have the answer to. Okay, so if you don't know that question, I don't know what question. Identify the biggest business problem you have. That's your question. If you or go home and ask your spouse, what's the question I should be? What's the thing that I could learn to do that would improve our relationship or improve my relationship with others? They know.
I'm sure they do.
So either you know, or you got to find somebody else who knows the question you should be trying to answer.
Excellent advice. I love it. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to leave it at that nugget of like that question, because that is huge. Like that is such a powerful, impactful thing that can help really everybody, like not even just business owners. It's going to help us in our lives too, right? Like what's the question I need the answer to just to move to the next phase of my life. So I love that. So thank you so much. So before we go, what is new and exciting, or what's coming up for the Oxley Group or for you?
Yeah, so two things. We re-released our book, The 4 Faces of Frustration. So it is actually on Amazon. You can order it on Amazon. It is it's a fable. Years ago, I would read business books. I still do. You can see them behind me. They're so boring. And I thought, I don't want to write a boring book. So I wrote a fable about a guy who takes over a company and it is failing. And he has to learn how to manage people differently. And the problem we run into quite often when we're managing people is we just make this assumption that they're like us. And so we mismanage people a lot. And so it's a simple concept. We're big on having models that explain complex things. So it's a way to explain complex things. So that's available on Amazon. We also, if you go to transformingresults.com, we have what we call our leadership blueprint workshop. It's our gift to podcast listeners like yours, where it's a 90-minute workshop where we'll help you sketch out a blueprint for your leadership development. So if people want to sign up for that, they can also sign up for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Just run over to Amazon and Transforming Leadership?
Results.
Transformingresults.com.
Yeah, because we're all about results. We're not about leadership training. We're about changing.
Well, that makes perfect sense too. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I learned a ton just from listening to you. So thank you so much. I loved it. So to all the listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode and you're excited about what Andrew's got coming up, go check out his websites and go check out Amazon and grab his book. And also, if you liked today's episode, please like it, share it with a friend, leave a review, and leave a comment on the YouTube video, because that is how we get the word out to more people. So thank you so much. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Building Blocks podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. If you found value in our conversation, please leave a quick review, like, or share. It helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. For more resources and insights, visit christinaschmidt.ca, where you can find tools and support to empower your leadership journey. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.